your time. Better live it today. Take a stand. Meet your dreams halfway. Leave behind all the fear and doubt. And welcome to your beautiful now. Hello, everyone. Derek Floyd here. Beautiful Now Podcast. Welcome to another edition of Beautiful Now Live. This is the segment where I interview special guests to talk about things that are topical and relevant to you, your family, and your community, and that could affect your daily life. And today's topic is extremely sensitive and almost controversial. But before I get into it, let me remind you, as always, that if you like the content you see here, please hit me with a like or subscribe to the channel. This lets me get the most updated content to you as soon as it's available. And hit the little gray bell next to the subscribe. This lets me notify you that the new content is ready. Also, the things that we always do are brought to you by and powered by IK Multimedia. Now, today's subject is actually very controversial. It's been a debate for quite a while because we're talking about something that seems to be almost not true, almost not possible. And that is sex addiction real? We think about that topic and we go, how can we be addicted to something that is natural or part of our human condition, so to speak? And we've had this thrown up in our faces from a lot of superstars as of late, like Tiger Woods and Michael Douglas, Lowe, Charlie Sheen, all saying they have a sex addiction. And are we saying, is this true or is this just an excuse? We just don't know. But today, we're going to dive in and find out. We have an incredibly talented special guest who's a sex addiction therapist to talk to us about what this really means and how we can kind of put this together or kind of put this in our minds to say this could be a real disorder. Will you please help me welcome my special guest, sex addiction therapist Charlene Lewis, and sex addiction coach, her husband, Josh Lewis. How are you guys this morning?
Doing great.
Good. Thanks for having us.
Hey, thanks for getting up early to help us talk about this incredibly difficult subject. It's something that not everybody's ready to kind of dive into, right?
No, it's definitely a subject that people try to avoid.
A little bit taboo, like your grandmother would never talk about this thing, right?
Right, absolutely.
And Josh, how you doing today, buddy?
Good to be here. Thanks for having us. I think it's a great opportunity to talk about what people are not talking about.
Yeah. As I dug into this subject to kind of prepare for this great interview, I started seeing all this stuff on the line, and of course, I saw TED Talks. I tried to dig around, and there's just a debate of whether this is a real disorder. Is sex addiction real, or is this just an excuse for people who have bad discretionary issues? You know what I mean?
It's real. I mean, sex addiction is really out there. A lot of people are struggling with it and not talking about it. And I think some of the stuff in the media just kind of puts more confusion, to what's going on there. Like you said, there's a difference between being a sex addict and, someone that's cheating.
Yeah. So let's just dive right into that. When you talk about someone that's cheating, what I found is there's all of a sudden this enormous influx of celebrities that are saying, hey, I've got a sex addiction. Tiger Woods, Harvey Weinstein, Lowe, and Michael Douglas, Charlie Sheen. I mean, there's a laundry list of people. And I looked at it and thought, these are all the guys that were cheating. Is this a real disorder? And what is the actual definition of the disorder?
So in order for something to be an addiction, there has to be compulsive use. There has to be continued use despite consequences. And it's really about like an obsession and a compulsion and something that the person has no control over. There's also like an increase in tolerance. So someone that cheats usually doesn't have those components in there. It doesn't have that obsessiveness or that lack of control. They can get caught, they can almost lose, their wives or their husbands, and they can stop. They go into therapy, they work on whatever the issues are, and that's it. It's a non-issue. With sex addicts, they can lose everything and still go right back to doing whatever it is that they were doing. They literally have no control over it. And part of it, it's also a brain disorder in ASAM, which is like the medical association. It's absolutely part of, the prefrontal cortex is the one that handles impulses. And in addicts, it's shown that that part is just very underdeveloped. Like it stops working, for, lack of a better term.
And, how long have you been in this side of therapy or learning about this different topic? How'd you discover it?
So I've been doing this for, I was asking my husband the other day, I was like, how long have I been doing this? And in my mind, it seems like only a couple of years, but in total, it was like 15 years, maybe 7, 8 in sex addiction. But I'm like, oh my God, that's a long time.
That's a long time.
It doesn't feel that way though, so that's probably a good thing.
Well, you said something perfectly, and what a lot of us think about is how can you be addicted to something that's part of the natural human condition? Like, how can you have an eating disorder because you enjoy food? If you eat food too much, it's still part of what you do. It's part of who you are as a human because it's part of what we do. And sexuality, or sex itself, is a natural urge. So how can you be addicted to something that's already natural? And if you are, then how do you cut that off? Because normally the therapy part of things would say, in order for you to stop doing that, you have to stop doing whatever that thing is to make your therapy happen. So you don't stop having sex. Where is the line drawn in that part of it?
Well, yeah, it's when it's feeling compulsive, when it comes from a place of medicating underlying feelings. So anxiety, depression, I want to have sex, to, an outcropping of actual of love, of a committed relationship as, something that's a little bit more meaningful, so when it's used to medicate feelings, then it's a little bit more, it can be a little bit more addictive.
And you as a coach probably find people trying to ask that very question, how do you coach them into understanding this is an actual problem and not just, I just want sex too much. You know what I mean?
Well, I think the first question really is, how are you doing with it? Like, is it a problem for you or isn't it?
Sure.
Is it causing problems in your life or isn't it? And starting from that place, because I think it's very difficult to force somebody into a mold that they're not comfortable with. And so it really has to come from within for them to be able to identify as a sex addict. So they're saying, I have tried to stop this over and over and over. And I just, I've tried this, I've tried that, I've tried moving, I've tried therapy, I've gone to church, I keep falling and I keep doing it. And I say, okay, well, then you might have a problem. Let's continue to look at it.
And that brings me to an interesting question. There's the husband and wife, there's the spouse that they thought really healthy relationship, and one of them is truly an addict, but they don't really know how to diagnose it, per se. Like you're saying, they're not sure that they're normal or abnormal. What are some of the symptoms and signs that the other spouse can look for to kind of help diagnose in the direction of this?
Well, I think part of that definition of, continued use, despite all of this adversity or despite all the consequences, a lot of times these partners, find their husbands, whether it's with an escort or massage parlors or pornography, there's usually a huge blowout fight, a lot of, promises that I'll never do this again, and it continues. And when that continues and they fight and it continues and it's like this, hamster wheel, that's usually a sign of a bigger problem, that would need to get assessed. And there's also the secrecy and the hiding of it, which is, something that the partners look at as well. Or is the husband or wife present? Are they emotionally available during family functions or, even just within the couple? Because a lot of times with addiction, there's a sense of avoidance. Right? I'm avoiding my partner. I'm avoiding family engagements because I just don't want to deal with any of the stuff that, comes up. One thing that I wanted to just kind of circle back for a second when you asked about sex being like a natural human, desire. And I want to really reiterate that there is nothing bad about sex. Nothing. It's good, loving thing that we engage in.
Mm-hmm.
The process part of it is, like Josh was saying, when we use it for different purposes than what it's intended to be and for longer,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because people can use sex to de-stress. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's a healthy,
Sure.
but when it's my only way that I can de-stress, that's when it becomes a problem. When I don't have any other coping mechanisms, and that's the only thing I find to make myself feel better, then I'm going to use people or, the computer to feel better, or even my spouse, to feel better. So it's not about giving and taking. It's really just about taking. What can I get? And that's also like, a sign of addiction when there is no give and take. It's just take.
Addictive behavior, you may have been an alcoholic or something else, but Josh, you said sometimes people just switch one addiction to the other. They may get cured physically by the alcohol addiction or whatever that may be, and then they just put that behavior on sex. Does that happen more often than not? Is that how it starts, or does someone start with just sex addiction from there?
Well, it's funny. I don't know if I can or should disclose, but it was my first addiction. So I'm an alcoholic and drug addict in recovery. So I've been in recovery for nearly 18 years this April.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Yeah. And sex addiction was my first addiction. So it became an addiction early on in childhood, 10, 11, 12 with pornography. And so interestingly enough, I find that it is kind of like the gateway drug that a lot of people don't talk about, and in fact is becoming more and more the gateway drug. And another distinction I would make about sex addiction is that people would think that the end goal of sex addiction is actually like an orgasm, or but it has nothing to do with that, believe it or not. And so how would you make the distinction? It's actually the hunt. So like the looking, the searching for that next partner, for that next picture, for that next, there's a sort of like draw and compulsive draw to it. And, having an orgasm is just the last teeniest part of it. It has really nothing to do with the actual chemical release at the end. It's sort of the charge of the searching and it almost becomes like a trance-like state where you become numb and everything else falls into the background, and it's like And so somebody would kind of have to relate to that feeling to be able to say, hey, I might have a problem.
Wow. And Charlene, you were about to speak something. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I apologize. I just wanted to bring that topic back out because most people will go, well, if it's just addiction, maybe they just have an addictive nature, and can it be solved by just curing the addictive nature first? Charlene, is that somewhere you can go because you're a specialist in that area?
Anyone can become addicted to anything, right? Because it's exactly what Josh was talking about. It's about the chemicals, right? There's chemicals that our brain naturally releases, and anything taken out of balance can become addictive, whether it's food, exercising, gambling, drugs. So it's really a lot of the healing, the therapy, the work is around what's making me so uncomfortable to begin with. Where does this pain that I need to medicate come from? And more often than not, it comes from, different childhood experiences. And you were saying, can someone become, addicted to sex and just that, later on in life maybe, or yes, but that's not the norm, right? So if we're talking about a bell curve, those would be more like outside of the bell curve, like someone who had absolutely no addiction. And with pornography, I think that's more and more common, right? Because of the internet and how, easy it is to get. There could be someone that, just stumbled upon pornography at the age of 20, 25, which, I've had clients, and all of a sudden they're addicted. It's like the crack cocaine, of the sex industry, because of how fast and all of the images and, everything that you could do in a very small amount of time. It can absolutely take over someone's life. But more often than not, it's something that came previously at a younger age. Whenever I have clients and we talk about when did this start for you, or when did you realize that you started using sex as a way of coping? 90% of the time, it's like between the ages of 7, 10, 12. Usually when they start experiencing their body and their sexual organs and realizing, oh, this feels good. Right? Now, if that person realizes a moment of, oh, this feels good, and most of their childhood is, their parents are fighting or a lot of chaos, or the parents are not there really, or they're there, but they're not emotionally present. So they feel alone. So they're walking around with this feeling of either super anxious and when's the next shoe going to drop, or I'm all alone and no one really cares. All of a sudden I find, my penis or my vagina, and it's, ooh, this feels good. I like this feeling, and I'm going to do this.
Gotcha.
Now,
Gotcha.
now, if they had a better way of coping early on and knew how to deal with that uncomfortability, that anxiety, and were taught early on more healthy ways of dealing with that, then they wouldn't have to turn to it. But, your body and your brain kind of do whatever they need to do to be able to survive and feel like they're going to be safe and comfortable. And if they don't have those tools, then, addiction can become an option, right?
It kind of becomes their outlet, right? It becomes their space to go when the world gets nuts. They go over here, whether it be pornography or whatever, which is amazing. Thank you for breaking that down. And which leads me into a broader question, which is, of course, is pornography. That whole segment of the world is huge. I mean, we've seen this around for years, and some people even say it's healthy to watch a little bit of pornography inside your relationship and all that stuff. How do you structure that thought, or do you feel that pornography is destructive, or does it have its own place in sexuality within a healthy couple?
I absolutely think it has its own place within within a healthy couple as part of sexuality, as long as it's okay for the person, and for both individuals, because then now once you're married, it's not just you, but it's also your partner. But pornography in and of itself, I don't think it's a bad thing. And that's coming from someone that's, Catholic and raised Catholic, and that whole Catholic guilt took me so long.
I was going to go to guilt. I was waiting for it, but you got there already.
Incredible. But it's, if you're in a couple and it's a loving, committed relationship and both people are okay with, bringing that in, it's fine. It's really about the couple, being okay with it, and that it's not being used compulsively, or that the person needs it every time they're going to have sex with their partner, because then that's not really healthy, I don't think.
Josh, what do you think?
I think it's a lot like alcohol, or, and especially alcohol, I think would be a good analogy. It's like saying, hey, well, what's wrong with alcohol? Well, if you're able to use it in a way that is not destructive, and it actually, adds value to your life and adds, gives you benefits, then there's nothing wrong with it. It's for those people that it doesn't work that way, where, one or two drinks and there's some reaction or something goes on where a person just loses control and everything falls apart. So I don't think it's too black and white. If you end up doing it compulsively, then it's a problem. Because I think it's harmful to me personally. I think it's harmful to, really vilify any form of sexual expression. Where I have a little bit more difficulty with pornography really is, at least in my mind, thinking about those people participating in the industry. I feel like maybe some of those people, younger women who are getting into it, may come from broken homes, or come from difficult places, or they may have suffered sexual abuse. And I don't feel like those people are getting, quite enough help. And so I think it would be important for people in that industry, I would hope, to be a little bit healthier and a little bit more centered. I would like that. So in that respect, I do have some problem with pornography, I guess you could say. But aside from that, like an expression of love, that people that might that might prompt couples to experience different, more fun, more intimate ways of showing love, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with it.
I want to add one thing, especially with the pornography, is when, and more so with guys, right? When guys start learning about sex through pornography, then that's going to cause a huge issue. Because pornography, it's great, but it's not real sex, right? People don't really, they're actors.
Sure.
And your kind of layperson, I think, forgets that and then goes out thinking this is what sex is like.
Sure.
And then you get to a real sexual relationship and it's not like that. And, that can cause difficulty within a relationship. And especially, a lot of times for the women, because they feel that, well, I'm not that, or I'm not having an orgasm, or my husband doesn't look like that, whatever it could be.
Sure.
So I think that's where pornography can kind of be harmful. And if that is your sex education, then you're getting it in the wrong place, because that's not what real sex is like.
I mean, you said it perfectly. A lot of men start off in that space. And I know we've talked about the shame that comes from the addiction cycle. You start off, you try to stop, you mess up, you fall off, you feel ashamed, and the cycle goes again. With porn being such a quote unquote shameful, sinful release, how does one draw the conclusion that porn's okay if your mind's already saying, or you were taught, this is negative, this is sinful, this is shameful? I don't know if they can draw those two together and make it seem healthy. You know what I mean?
It's really hard, especially if you grow up in like a religious, family or environment, because it is so ingrained, right? So what I had to do for myself was kind of come to the term of, how am I using this? Am I using it to enhance my relationship, and is it consensual? A lot of times that shame comes from like that non-consent, right? That I am bad. I am a bad person. I'm doing something, that's making me this bad person. But it's not, I'm not a bad person, and then there's that difference between shame and guilt, right? Where guilt is, I did something wrong, right? Like I believe that God doesn't want me to do this, and I did it. And okay, I did something that I'm not comfortable that I did. That's guilt.
No,
I mean, well, guilt in the sense of, I don't want to do this behavior. I don't think I'm a bad person. I just don't want to do the behavior. With shame is, I'm this horrible person. I keep doing it over and over. And why am I so bad?
Gotcha.
And that's kind of, the difference. I had to come to terms with what my God was like. Even though I'm Catholic, I still have my own conception of what that God wants for me. Right? And it may not necessarily be the, sex is bad and you have to do it this way on this day for it to be good. That's just not, I don't think God really wants that for me. But it's an individualized process.
So the distinction between guilt and shame, the guilt would be, I've done something bad. And the shame would be, I at my core inherently am bad.
Gotcha.
There's something at the core wrong with me. And I think with religion, at least my understanding and belief of God is that I am not at the core bad. I may do bad things and I can be forgiven. When you get into that state of I am broken, and there's something inherently wrong with me, then that can feel incredibly painful, which leads you back into acting out. And I think it's important to remove that shame piece from it and realize, hey, I'm not a bad person. I may be struggling with something that's very, very difficult and, can be seen as an addiction. And so I may be, sick or having, extreme difficulty, but I'm not a horrible, broken person.
I love that. And as a Christian myself, my own faith, there are lines in this discussion that make me go, and just being honest, pornography is one of those things that was completely taboo in my home, and the shame and the sin of sex outside of marriage, all those things that combat that that put you in a space where you had to figure out who you are and adjust what your faith is to what you believe. Those are tough questions for most people. And I think as we dive into this sex addiction part of it, a lot of it becomes a relationship with who you are and who you believe. And, because it's so ingrained in us. And you're talking about a behavior, like we said in the beginning, that's natural. So how you color your faith will make a big difference on how this is understood.
You're saying it perfectly. And the thing, that I've seen is like the more we oppress something or repress something, like I can't do it, it's bad. Our natural tendency almost is to want to do it more. But if I kind of come to terms with, I can do it, but I don't really want to do it because it doesn't align with my faith, then that's just a different way of looking at it. As far as like the cheating goes, or being unfaithful, me and Josh were talking about this before is, what's the thing with the cheating? It's not really, it is the sex, but even more so than the sex, it's the lying, right? I'm lying to my wife. That's what's wrong. Now, what's the lie about? It's about sex. It could be lying about money. It could be lying about a million different things.
Yeah.
But religion tends to focus so much on how, sex, and, sex is bad unless it's done in this way, where really it's, okay, well, what are we really looking at? Dishonesty, right? And dishonesty in a relationship, no matter what you're doing, is going to be, negative, and it's going to have a negative impact on the relationship.
It's the broken trust. It's the broken trust. For sure.
Absolutely.
And when I work with partners, right, because I work with both, I work with the sex addict, but I also work with the partner. When I work with partners, over and over again, they, across the board, they say it's not even so much the sex, it's the lie, that I was lied to, that, they weren't honest. And even when the addict gets sober and then has relapses, which is very common in sex addiction, because it's a lot harder. Sex addiction, I think, is way harder than alcohol and drug abuse. Because like you were saying, with alcohol and drugs, you kind of just, okay, it's a substance, we stop it, we just don't do it, and that's the end of that. With sex, we're going to keep having sex, just like with eating, we're going to keep eating. So it's finding that balance. But with, the partners, they'll say, if he would have been honest that he had a slip, I wouldn't have gotten as angry. Because that honesty builds trust and vulnerability, which is so crucial for a relationship. But when the addict lies about it, the wives, or the husbands, what they really get upset about is the lying, the betrayal. It goes so deep to the person's core when they're betrayed.
That is the space, that close space of trust and true intimacy is actually what the sex addict is trying to avoid by acting out in sex, because becoming so close and intimate in that way that I personally believe God intended becomes a very scary place, because originally, as maybe youngsters or children, they weren't able to trust and feel close and safe. And so it's almost a way of protecting the self from true intimacy. And, that's what I found. The big confusion, the scary thing for people with sex addiction is, oh my gosh, if I give this up, it's going to be terrible. What am I going to have? And actually, it's like you'll find out, like, you've been on a steady diet of bologna and cheese for 20 years now, and you're not going to eat. But guess what? There's a whole buffet available. I'm telling you, if you walk through that door, you're going to experience something with your wife that's going to blow your mind that you don't know that's there. So give it a shot.
Wow. I love that analogy too. So that's so well spoken. And I know I'm gonna dive into a little bit of what you guys have started, Return to Intimacy, here at the end. But I want to circle back to join a question that we started off with, which is, since sex addiction is something that's natural, and normally when you try to cut addiction off, you have to abstain from it. What is the actual therapy, or how do you go through and release someone from sex addiction? And you just tell them they can't have it in their marriage for a while? What's the first steps that they go through?
So I usually, with my clients, and this is all, again, very individual based, but we usually do like a 90-day abstinence period, right, from everything. And that my purpose for that is so that they can start seeing times in those 90 days that they would have used the addiction, right? So it's almost like, let's kind of see what feelings come up, because you've been medicating for so long that you don't even know what the feelings are. A lot of, people, when I ask them, where did this come from, or why do you, what drives you to act out, they'll just say, oh, because I'm horny. I'm like, okay, well, not all the time, right? It's like, we're not horny, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. That's not how the body, works. Yes, you could have a higher libido, and I take that into account. But when they stop for those 90 days, and sometimes we have to break it down to one day. I mean, it really is one day at a time. But they start seeing, oh, I was anxious, or I got really upset at my wife for something, or I felt really powerless at work. And we start making the connection that, okay, this is a time where you really wanted to go and masturbate. And so it wasn't really because you were horny, but it was because you wanted to not feel that insecurity or that powerlessness or that rage. And, it's not now. And again, I don't do that. If a couple is married, I may not say 90 days, of abstinence, unless sex.
Yeah, you're putting the hurt on us of 90 days, darling. Come on. that was a little bit of humor. A little bit of humor from us couples.
Well, like one thing, like practically speaking, we talk about kind of these circles of things that I absolutely don't want to do, these things that are fringe behaviors, these things that, lead me closer to acting out, and then these positive things that I want to be doing. And realistically, when working with a sex addict, I try to focus on the most harmful first. So if it's, somebody engaging in pornography, but also acting out with escorts or doing other things that are high risk, it's doing less harm, and first tackling those things and saying, okay, we're going to remove escorts, and we're going to remove all of it. And the escorts and sex outside of marriage, for a fact, you do not want to be engaging in. So, let's try to remove all of them, but it would be a very positive if for 90 days we remove that, and then in time, it's like, okay, wow, I really did it. Like, I do have some say in this. I can participate in my own recovery. This actually kind of works. Okay, let's try it with the pornography. And oh my gosh, it's working. I've never gone a month, 2 months without it. And then it takes on a momentum. And so I think in practice, it's been good for me to actually, see it in a way that isn't black or white. Stop everything. That's it. It would be nice and it would be great. But in practice, I haven't seen it work that way. That isn't to say that that's not what we should be shooting for. But in practice, that's not the way I've seen it most often work out.
Like I said, my first thought was, and you've answered it, was, how does a husband and wife couple just be abstinent? You said 60, 90 days. I thought that's tough for a husband or a wife to abstain from that natural urge for themselves as a couple. But I'm sure there are ways and boundaries and some guardrails, so to speak, in which you lower that inhibition and kind of keep that at a healthy pace, and make sure that both people in the party understand it's like both people have to understand the goal of this. So if the wife said, hey, I want you to get better, and it's like, okay, we can't have sex for 60 days, as long as they're in agreement with that and they're both going for the same goal, it's possible. But if one's like, I don't know, or how's this going to work out, and the other one's restless about it, it's not going to function well, no?
And that's why it's such an individual case, and depending on the sex addict's level of sex addiction, and type of sex addiction. It's kind of like, it's a little different in this sense, but I'm going to use it, the alcoholic that is drinking every single day around the clock, and the one that, binges on the weekends, right?
Sure.
So it's similar in the sense of they lose control,
Okay.
And what I don't want is for the sex addict. One of the reasons of this 90-day thing also is I don't want for the sex addict to say, okay, I stopped using porn, and I'm not having, sex with escorts or massage parlors. So now I'm going to go to my wife and want sex all the time to kind of escape those feelings, because then I start using my partner. So usually when we talk about this, we look at what's best for this couple. I have some couples that have done the 90 days and it's been awesome. And I've had some couples, like you're saying, that it just didn't work. So we had to see, okay, well then let's do, some questions that we answer before we have sex. Internally, not, we're not going to talk about it, but am I in a good place? Am I, wanting to just medicate and use my wife? If I can answer no to those, yes to the question of I'm in a good place, I really just want to be with my wife, okay, then, that's fine. But if I'm anxious, if I'm depressed, if I'm, super upset, I'm not going to go to my wife just to use her or him. And I always say her or him because there's a lot of female sex addicts as well, and husbands are the partners, and that's not really talked about so much. So I always use it, with both sexes. But it's, realizing that what's my motive, for having sex. And a lot of times in early recovery, you don't really know what your motive is. So, you need some assistance. The thing also with pornography is that there is a really high relapse rate, because it's like what Josh is saying, that's what we're shooting for. But the practicality of it is it's very difficult. It's not as easy as, okay, I'm going to do 90 days and that's it. I'm not going to use. So when he was talking about those 3 circles and that outer circle being all the healthy stuff, that's also something that I focus on, is let's not focus as much on what you can't do, but what you can do. Right. So we start implementing hanging out with family, doing, sports or hobbies or things that maybe you've always been interested in, but never have done it. Praying, meditating, spiritual activities,
making music, hanging out with friends, playing sport,
things that are fun. And when they're focused more on that, then the other stuff, I don't need it as much, because now I'm starting to build these other outlets. And we use 12-step meetings in our practice. So I do encourage people to go to 12-step recovery, and partly because it reduces that shame, because now I'm with a whole other group of people that are just like me.
Wow.
Helpful.
It sounds like there's not a cookie cutter answer to this, which is great, because that lets people know everybody's different and there's just not a one size fit all kind of thing. So I appreciate you guys being so open and sharing multiple ways of how this can be resolved. I think, as I've spoken to other people, there's also alternate lifestyles, like the swinger lifestyle or something like that, where there are consulting adults that are trading partners and that type of thing. Is that a form of someone releasing sex addiction or being involved, or do you recommend that part as well?
It could be both. It's just like the first question that you started off with, these celebrities, So with the swingers specifically, and I'm glad, you brought up that question, because I had a ton of bias myself amongst that kink BDSM community until I was trained in it. Right. And I'm in the process of getting my PhD in sexology, and my specialty, my specific coursework was in the kink BDSM community. And that was my biggest question,
Please say to the subscribers what that stands for. You said BDSM or something like that. I didn't know. I wasn't sure what that was. So please be a little bit more clear.
Domination, sadomasochism.
Bondage, domination, sadomasochism. So
just need to make sure everybody understands. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm not going to get, all into it. I don't think there's anything necessarily, there's nothing wrong with that community. The big thing with that community and their, sexual interactions and like a sex addict is one word. And that one word is consent. They have consent. The kink world uses that word as consent. Sex addicts, that's a non-existent word. They don't care if you consent, don't consent. They're doing what they want to do.
I'm going to get mine.
Yeah. Right.
Gotcha.
So in that, if the partner, again, just like the watching porn, if me and my husband talk about it, are healthy in our emotional intimacy, and we both consent to bringing someone into the marriage or going to one of these clubs, and it works for us, then it's okay. If one person it doesn't work for, then it's not going to work for the couple, because then it's not okay. Mm-hmm. So it all goes back to consent. It's really complicated. There's a lot more to it, but I think the big difference is consent.
Yeah, and I love that you've clarified that, though, because there's a lot of layers to this. I feel like we could probably be there for a minute, especially with the partners. But I think the way you've expressed it perfectly is that it's consent is the main issue here. So I don't want to take you off of it, but I don't want to stay too long on that subject, because it's just a whole other layer of sexuality when we start talking about swinging and partners and all that stuff. It's just way deeper. It's its own episode, right? So, but I appreciate you clarifying that, because it is a definite issue of consent. And even as I've sat and thought about it and said, hey, if this person wanted to go into that lifestyle, does that does that feed their addiction, so to speak? And if their spouse was okay with it, then I guess that's okay. But again, that's personal. And I don't know if I can judge that person to say, well, that's not good for you. I guess only the couple itself can really understand and judge that for themselves, right?
The couple with the therapist. I don't think that if you are a sex addict, it's going to be very easy or healthy. I think it's going to bring more challenges than the benefits that you can get from it. So I would personally, probably not, encourage sex addicts to go in there, because it's going to be harder, and again, it really depends on the couple.
Well, we are diving into some great topics here that are just kind of uncovering this whole thing. And I just feel like there's so many layers to this that I'm sure you're probably being encountered with every day, just because people are people. There's so many things that people do differently, right? To the couple or the single person that's kind of watching today, maybe thinking, I'm struggling with this, what's the first step they can take to get their life back? What's the first step to do?
Well, I think they could absolutely, if you Google amisexaddict.com, there's a sex addiction quiz.
It's like 40 questions.
And that will at least start giving you an idea of, do I have this thing? Even just by asking some of the questions, it can have that person kind of relate, like, okay, if they're asking this and I'm answering yes, then maybe I do have this problem, because someone who doesn't have the problem wouldn't answer yes to it for the most part. And it's just like in any other, in all of these 12-step programs, there's Alcoholics Anonymous has like a 20 question, answer these 20 questions. And if you answer, 6 or more, you're probably an alcoholic. Mm-hmm. And that misexaddict.com has that same thing. So that's, helpful. And I always say education, read about it, Google it. There are a ton of books, that deal with this. Out of the Shadows by Patrick Carnes is one that's for the addict. And the one for the partner is called Mending a Shattered Heart. It also, is both of those books are about sex addiction. And actually, Dr. Carol Clark also has a book called Addict America, which is a great book on just addiction, in general. And am I struggling with an addictive personality?
Wow. And I know, Josh, you had mentioned, of course, as a coach, that it's all about giving back to intimacy. And I know you guys have a program called Return Intimacy. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, it's a couple things, but at its core, what it truly is sort of like an online rehab. So Charlene worked under Patrick Carnes and is able to use his method of recovery. And there's a methodology that he uses in some of the rehabs that he has, one of which is, out in Arizona, the ones that these people pay tons of money to $50,000, $60,000 a month to do. We're able to do it with people from home, and it requires work, one-on-one individual therapy or one-on-one individual working with a coach, and a little bit of group group therapy, and a whole lot of education, a whole lot of psychoeducation on how addiction plays out in their life, whether they are or are not an addict, and being able to remove some of the denial that addicts have, and then moving forward. So it's like a 10-week program in recovery, and extracting yourself from that process. And so from that, we've gone into a similar program for women and partners, really, of sex addicts who don't know how to cope. And there's an entire set of steps and practices that can be adopted, which can really change everything. And so we felt like 30 million Americans suffering from sex addiction, and it being so difficult to get this type of treatment and so expensive, we thought it would be awesome if we could make it available to really everybody.
Wow. That's just amazing. And I've known you for years and didn't even know that this was part of your history. And I love that you're so open about it and transparent. And I think that's what help a lot of people come out of the shadows. If they can say, hey, I'm like that. He's not ashamed. He can come and talk about it clearly. I can too. I think removing the shame or the stigma from what they've gone through and allow them to be who they are and get the help is probably the biggest marker that you can make in this, don't you think?
Yeah, and letting people know that they are not alone. They're absolutely not alone.
Yeah. Well, you two have been an amazing guest together, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk about a very delicate, very controversial subject. But I think I've learned a lot just listening to what you guys have shared, and I hope that you guys wish more success. And if anyone wants to talk to you or get a hold of you guys about the program you have, how do they find you?
Return to intimacy.com. We have a contact form, or Charlene at return, and that's number 2, intimacy.com.
Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much for taking the time, and for everybody out there that's watching this particular episode. I know it's been a touchy one, but take some time and listen. We didn't take this episode to judge or take a direction and say this is right or wrong. It's information for you to decipher for yourself and figure out what fits your life. If you're a Christian like myself or a Catholic like Charlene was, you've got to make this fits in your faith and figure out where you lie. But take some time and just discover what the real information is here, and you'll make your own decision and what fits your life. Hope this helps someone today. Put your thoughts in the comments. But as always, look forward to seeing you again at the next Beautiful Now Live. Have a great one, guys. Take care. And thank you, Charlene